Good morning. Welcome to the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee of the Housing Opportunities Commission today on May 15th, 2026. I'd like to welcome you all to our meeting. I'm joined today by our Vice Chair, Jeffrey Merkowitz, to my immediate left, and to Paul Weech, also Commissioner. We constitute the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee. Also like to acknowledge the presence of our President and our Senior Vice President, Chelsea Andrews, and Kareem Brown, as well as our staff to this event. We will start this morning with the approval of our minutes of April the 17th, 2026. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor signify by aye. Aye. So ordered. We will now move into the discussion part of our agenda. The first item, which is a continuation really of our budget process that we have been going through starting in last month's meeting and continuing today. So we're going to have a presentation of the Opportunity Housing Budget Fund budget as part of this meeting as the first item. So I will turn to our president for the introduction.
Yes, thank you, commissioners, members of the public, the HOC team. As mentioned, our budget process has multiple steps, and we bring our various components in terms of different funds in various tranches so that we can have an opportunity to hear feedback and to refine as we lead up to our final budget presentation that occurs in June. Before you right now is our Opportunity Housing Fund budget. Of course, as years past, our team has worked tirelessly to try their best to predict what we anticipate our revenues and expenses related to the Opportunity Housing Fund. I will note that the departments that are involved in this effort are definitely many. There's the finance department, our asset management team, our property management team, our maintenance team, the executive team, and I'm probably missing a number of others that really take the time to look at how our properties are currently performing, forecast as best as possible. And we definitely took the approach of being more conservative in this year's iteration in hopes that we can over deliver. But we don't know and cannot predict human behavior. And I think past will let us know that that is definitely one of the variables that have become the most challenging. We have been diligent in our efforts in regards to lease enforcement. We have been diligent in our efforts in regards to trying to control expenses. You will hear more about those efforts at our May 28th meeting, where we also share out our updated reforecast for this year's budget. But I just want to couch today's presentation in understanding that as we look to 27, we did so as conservatively as possible. And I will now turn it over to our finance team to provide you with more details.
Thank you, President Andrews. Good morning, commissioners and viewing public. For the record, Tim Getzinger, Senior VP of Finance and CFO. Today, we will continue our discussions of the FY 2027 recommended budget and introduce any changes that have occurred since it was presented in April 8th. As a reminder of the budget timeline, on the 8th, we presented the President's FY 27 recommended budget. Later in April, we provided the recommended budget book. On April 17th, we had a budget BF&A meeting regarding the general and public fund. Today, May 15th, we will be discussing the mortgage finance and real estate, as well as the opportunity housing budget. And then on June 10th, we will be meeting to adopt the FY 2027 budget. And at or around July 31st, we will be providing you with the approved budget book. In this morning's session of the BF&A committee, David Wilson, a financial analyst on the budget team, will present a review of the FY 2027 recommended budget for the Opportunity Housing Fund. Following that, Terry Fowler, HOC's budget officer, will present a review of the FY 2027 recommended budget for the mortgage finance and real estate divisions. As an overview of some of the changes of approach that we took in developing the Opportunity Housing budget, The FY 2027 Opportunity Housing Budget was developed using a more structured and collaborative approach, including the implementation of a budget boot camp to drive alignment and accountability across both third-party management companies and our scattered site regional management teams. In developing the budget, we incorporated key lessons learned from FY 2026, particularly the financial strain caused by high resident balances, delayed eviction timelines, and the resulting increase in move-outs. These factors significantly impacted operations, driving higher than anticipated maintenance costs, unit turn expenses, and vacancy exposure. As a result, the FY 2027 budget includes elevated expense assumptions and a more conservative revenue projection to better reflect current operating conditions. As we developed the budget, staff considered property performance and the impact of the budgets as if we were simulating a reforecast of the current operations. While the FY 2027 budget reflects lower cash flow in the near term, it represents the most realistic and responsible projection of portfolio performance. The strategy focuses on stabilization, working through the eviction-related turnover, restoring occupancy, and positioning non-performing assets to trend towards break-even by the end of FY 2027, with the expectation of improved financial performance and achieving positive cash flow in FY 2028. It is important to note that these projections remain highly dependent on external factors, particularly the pace of the court system, as evictions processing timelines will vary and directly impact both occupancy levels and overall expenses across the portfolio. I wanted again to acknowledge the budget team and all agency departments for their work and dedication in helping to assemble these budgets. Today does not mark the last of budget changes. During the approved Budget Commission meeting, additional changes will be presented, and during the year, there will be more than likely some budget amendments. It's worth noting that although we call the final document the approved budget, it's a living, breathing document that can be modified based upon certain changes, such as adding or removing a property in the Opportunity Housing portfolio, or adjusting the budget for certain revenue or expense projections. And with that, to present the FY 2027 Opportunity Housing Budget is David Wilson, our financial analyst.
Good morning, Commissioners, President Andrews, staff, and viewing public. For the record, my name is David Wilson, financial analyst. Today, I will be presenting the FY 2027 budget for the Opportunity Housing Fund. We can begin by moving to slide 2, page 10 on your packet. This chart represents FY 2027 agency recommended operating budget as presented at the April 8th, 2026 Commission meeting. At that time, we presented a budget of $395.3 million that was balanced with a draw of $4.6 million from the General Fund Operating Reserve, or GFOR, and the use of restricted proceeds from commission-approved activities in the Opportunity Housing Fund. Please turn to slide 3, page 11, your packet. This chart represents FY 2027 agency revised operating budget, summarizing the changes made on April 17th, 2026. We began with the balanced budget using reserves. The revised budget now shows a surplus of approximately $131,000 based on increased funding from management fees earned from Housing Choice Voucher Program. Please turn to slide 4 on page 12. This chart represents an overview of income in the Opportunity Housing Fund from FY 2025 through FY 2027. That includes the trailing 12 months as of December 31st, 2025. The chart is broken into operating and non-operating income. You will note that non-operating income is highlighted in light blue. On the chart, let's look at the changes from FY 2026 amended budget. The income from FY 2027 recommended budget is $124.83 million, which represents a 3.21 increase from FY 2026 amended budget, the majority of which is based on rental income, net of concessions, vacancy, coupled with income from retail space, laundry, and parking income, and various fees. Miscellaneous income of $138,000, and finally, transfer between funds of $1.24 million includes county funding for various costs, as well as funding for shortfalls at a few properties that are being covered by transfer from existing property cash. It is worth noting, for the first time, we will not draw from the GFOR to cover the deficit at Metro Point Development Corp., which is projected to cash flow. Tenant and non-dwelling income increased $3.26 million, or 2.7%, from FY 2026 amended budget, mostly due to higher gross rent potential based on the 2026 County Executive Volunteer Rent Guideline, BRG, or of 3.3% at most properties. Vacancy loss projected to increase $423,000, or 5%, from FY 2026 amended budget, to align with increased vacancy loss experience since the budget was adopted as a result of the worsening economic environment influenced by reductions of the federal government workforce and multiple government shutdowns that have increased unemployment and caused residents to leave the area. Strategic leasing efforts have been put in place to address vacancy. However, it will take some time to recover since leasing enforcement for non-paying residents will temporarily increase vacancy at the units as the units are vacated and made ready for reoccupancy. Federal grants show a reduction of $42,000 based on the erroneous exclusion of the McKinney grant that reimburses certain costs for units at Montgomery Arms. The FY 27 revised budget now includes the grant. Investment interest income increased $25,000 based on the conservative approach to recognize interest income earned on operating cash at the properties. It is worth noting that a conservative approach was used since the rate increases experienced early in calendar year 2025 began to take a downward turn. Interest earned will be recognized but not assumed. Income transfers decreased by $27,000 from the FY 2026 amended budget, largely due to changes in the projected draws from existing reserves or cash based on property performance. Now let's look at the changes from the T12 as of 12/31/25. Tenant and non-dwelling income increased by $8.9 million, or 7.9%, mostly due to the higher gross rent potential based on the 2026 County Executive Volunteer Rent Guideline of 3.3% at most properties. Non-dwelling income decreased primarily based on the sale of Brookfield Road, partially offset by normal increases at the remaining retail locations. Vacancy loss is projected to decrease 32.9%, or $4.4 million, based on the strategic leasing efforts being deployed to increase occupancy. Miscellaneous income decreased $164,000 from the trailing 12 as of 12/31/25, mostly based on receipts of one-time fees received for promoting cable services when residents signed up at Cider Mill, and unanticipated bank reconciliation refunds received during the T12 period. Investment interest income has decreased $200,000 from the trailing 12 as of 12/31/25, based on a conservative approach to recognizing interest income earned on operating cash properties. As noted previously, the conservative approach was used since the rate increase experienced early in calendar year 2025 began to take a downward turn in the latter part of the year. Now let's look at the changes from FY 2027 recommended to FY 2027 revised. The FY 2027 revised is based on the inclusion of the McKinney grant of $42,000 and the removal of the Metropolitan Affordable from the Opportunity Housing portfolio, which will be re-syndicated as a calendar year low-income housing tax credit property. The total income increased by $901,000, primarily based on a reduction of tenant income of $934,000 and partially offset by an increase in federal grants of $42,000. Can we please turn to slide 5 on page 13 of your packet? Slide 5 reflects the distribution of sources of funds of $132.93 million to support the Opportunity Housing Fund. As you can see, tenant rents make up $119.19 million, or 96.18% of the fund's revenue. The remaining 3.82% comes from transfer between funds of $1.26 million, or 1.01%, non-dwelling income $1.19 million, or 0.96%, laundry and parking income totaling $1.2 million, or 0.96%. Other rent-related fees, $345,000, or 0.28%. Miscellaneous income of $137,000, or 0.11%. Other tenant income of $572,000, or 0.47%, and grants of $42,000, or 0.03%. Now can we move to slide 6 on page 14? This slide shows details of the expenses in the Opportunity Housing Fund for FY 2025 through FY 2026. That includes a trailing 12 months as of December 31st, 2025. You notice that the non-operating expenses are highlighted in light blue. Let's look at the changes from FY 2027 amended budget. Excuse me. The FY 2027 recommended budget includes the expenses of $123.69 million. Overall expenses increased by $2.7 million, or 2.2%, from the FY 2026 amended budget, due to increases in most operating expense categories, especially bad debt, maintenance, utilities, personnel. This was partially offset by reductions in debt service and development court fees, offset by increased restricted cash flow. This is primarily due to the removal of debt service payments and reserve contributions for Metropolitan based on upcoming renovations. As a reminder, due to the structure of the development court properties, the unrestricted cash is treated as an expense at the property and is received as fees in the general fund. Now let's look at changes from T12 as of 12/31/25. Due to decreases in most operating expense categories, partially offset by increases in personnel, insurance, and taxes, and utilities, coupled with an increase in reserve contributions and development court fees expenses that represent unrestricted cash from the properties. Now let's look at the changes from the FY 2027 recommended to FY 2027 revised. The revised budget is based on the inclusion of the grant of $42,000 and the removal of Metropolitan Affordable from the Opportunity Housing portfolio, which will be re-syndicated as a calendar year low-income housing tax credit property. The total expenses decreased by $1.33 million based on reduced operating expenses of $775,000 and the removal of restricted cash for Metropolitan Affordable of $596,000 and the increased development court fee for Montgomery Arms of $42,000. Now, if we can please turn to slide 7, page 15 of your packet. This chart reflects the distribution of the use of funds in the Opportunity Housing Fund in the FY 2027 revised budget. The chart shows the breakout of operating and non-operating expenses. You can see from the pie chart on the left that expenses for the properties are nearly equally divided between operating expenses, totaling $70.92 million, or 57.96%, and non-operating expenses totaling $51.44 million, or 42.04%. The three largest operating categories are personnel of $18.74 million, or 15.32%, operating fees of $18.18 million, or 14.87%, and maintenance of $12.43 million, or 10.16%. Bad debt accounts for a total of $4.62 million, or 3.33%. The remaining operating categories include administrative operating costs, utilities, and insurance and taxes totaling $16.93 million, or 13.87%. The pie chart on the right breaks down the non-operating expenses. The largest non-operating category is debt service of $38.38 million, or 31.37%, followed by contributions to reserves, which account for $4.07 million, or 3.33%. Finally, distribution of cash flow to the development corp fees of $4.26 million, or 3.48%, and restricted cash of $4.73 million, or 3.86%. Can we move to slide 8, page 16 on your packet? This chart reflects a 5-year history of total property cash flow, which is broken into 3 categories: development corporation fees, unrestricted cash flow, and restricted cash flow. As you can see from this chart, total projected cash flow has increased approximately $2.8 million for the FY 2027 revised budget when compared to the FY 26 amended budget. The increase is based on increased restricted cash flow of $2.18 million, increased unrestricted cash flow of $937,000, and decreased development corp fees of $319,000. The primary contributors are increased restricted cash, primarily from Metropolitan Development Corp., and increased unrestricted cash from the removal of a shortfall for Metropolitan Affordable in VPC1, coupled with increased cash flow for Westwood Towers, MHLP 7, and MPDU 164, and a decreased shortfall for VPC 1, Scattered Site 1, and MHLP 9, Scattered Sites, partially offset by increased shortfalls at Cider Mill, Manchester Manor, Parkway Woods, coupled with reduced cash flow at Bradley Crossing, Battery Lane, and Battery Park. The decreased development corporation fees from Glenmont Crossing Development Corp., Metropolitan Development Corp., Paddington Square Development Corp., Pooks Hill Development Corp., partially offset by the addition of the fee from Metropolitan Development Corp., and increased fees from MPDU 259 Development Corp. Now, can we turn to slide 9 on page 17 of your packet? The final chart Slide 9 represents the FY 2027 agency revised operating budget, summarizing changes discussed today and related to the opportunity housing shaded in peach, as well as the changes discussed on April 17th, 2026, related to the public fund shaded in green. As a reminder, the FY 2027 recommended budget includes a contribution of $4.63 million from the General Fund Operating Reserve. The net impact of the changes introduced in this presentation results in an increase of $42K in income to the general fund based on the increased development corporate fee income for Montgomery Arms. The net impact changes to income and expenses in the Opportunity Housing Fund is an increase of $428,000 to unrestricted cash flow. The total impact of these changes combined with increased management fees of $131,000 paid from the HCVP to the general fund for overhead expenses is a positive balance of $601,000, which will be discussed at the end of today's meeting. Thank you for your time and consideration. Are there any questions?
Any questions from the committee?
Yeah. Thank you. And I guess I want to start off by acknowledging, all the hard work that goes into this and, really appreciating the sort of additional efforts to kind of, look at conditions, look at, where we might have gotten things wrong in the past and how to make some of those corrections. So, I certainly don't want to suggest that we didn't do hard work in the past, but, appreciate, sort of the, trying to learn from whatever mistakes we've made. So with that, could we go to slide 4? And, also just, I know this is the one that like gives us so much agita, and, has always been so much, has always been so difficult to project. And, so, this one's kind of, I guess, the big one. Is this slide 4, the tenant, with the tenant income?
This is expenses.
Yeah.
Up one more, page 12.
Yeah, page.
If you could go to page 12, please.
Yeah, that one. Thanks. So, number of questions, I guess. We noted that the increase in tenant income is primarily due to sort of the increase in our rental levels. Is that accurate?
Yes, we're assuming the VRG of 3.3
Right.
on the income side, and there are a few properties that follow OCAF.
Okay. Yeah. And so, and then, it was offset a little bit by some increased vacancy losses. I assume what I'm trying to get a sense of is, are we projecting an increase in vacancies? How much of the increase in vacancy loss is also due to sort of the additional loss that we would experience because of the VRG? So
That would be a very small portion, as it's only 3.3% growth.
Yeah.
But what the team did is look at the trend of vacancy that has been experienced thus far in fiscal 26 and did a trajectory of what could be achieved monthly using the strong leasing efforts that they have in place. And the trend is to improve vacancy by month. The budget also assumed a conservative approach to that, because you're going to have leasing a unit, vacating a unit through lease enforcement, leasing units. So there is a trajectory to get to a 93 to 96% occupancy across the board by the end of fiscal 27, but we're starting at a higher vacancy in the beginning of the year due to where we are now and the continuation of lease enforcement And we have a couple of properties that will be under renovations, Metropolitan and Metro Point, which will have a higher
the increase in VRG is enough to offset that so that we project a higher total revenue?
yes.
Yeah, okay. And do we have additional units coming online that are part of that as well? Or like from tenant income, are we receiving more, are there more units that are providing income?
Will there be more units providing income as we
No,
improve
I mean like
occupancy?
new units. That
We don't have any
yeah.
new units
No
assumed in
new
the
units.
portfolio
Okay.
for fiscal 27.
Okay. One of the things I really appreciate off on that, and so I'm trying to understand how best to read the trailing 12, because obviously, 6 months of, if that's as of 12/30/25, 6 months of that are actually what is still in the FY25
Yes.
budget, the actual there, which was much lower. So, but still, I guess I'm curious, but that still gives us a sense of the actual expenses that we've been experiencing, or income and expenses that we've been experiencing. So, when you look at the recommended budget over the amended budget, it doesn't look like, okay, it's a modest increase in income.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the trailing 12, it looks like it's a significant increase
Right.
in income.
And a large portion of that, the vacancy number has gone down over $4 million from what was experienced during the T12. It's about a 43% improvement. So half of that is taking a vacancy that is much lower than what was experienced in calendar 25. That, coupled with the 3.3% income on your gross rents, accounts for that.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess, what's the, do you have a dollar number for the VRG, like how much the VRG increase is adding to that budget projection?
If I take the time to open the detail sheets, I can give it to you today, or we can provide that to you.
Sure.
I defer to you for your
Sure, yeah, that's fine.
preference.
I'm just trying to understand, like, if we looked at the trailing 12 and, assumed either nothing changed or vacancies went up, and except for the VRG, this is the number we, like, it would.
I'm almost there.
Yeah.
Terry, if I may, I think it would be best for us to get back to the commission on that particular number. Terry has more Excel spreadsheets than anyone in this room,
Yes.
or the
Yeah.
entire agency, actually. And I just want to make sure she has an opportunity to vet her numbers and give you an accurate reflection. But what you are asking in terms of the high level is trying to understand how much of VRG is contributing to our increased expectations in regards to our tenant income, and how we balance that with our expectations in regards to vacancy.
Yeah.
And so what the team has done is that large roll up per property, per unit calculation to give you those specifics in terms of what that breakdown is. We can get back to you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I totally support, obviously, the very conservative approach, and that's what I'm just trying to understand, making sure that that's what we've done here. I guess the part of this question also is with that conservative approach, I think somewhere in the packet there was an acknowledgement that we are in a worsening economic environment, and I'd be curious how you factored that in as well. Like, do we expect, um, greater unemployment, or even for those who are employed, having more challenges to make ends meet, um, and what the impact of that changing environment may be even on the court system. If if we get into a situation where, uh, you know, maybe not necessarily just from HOC, but there is greater lease enforcement across the county, and the courts. Are we expecting the court system to maintain its pace of lease enforcement rulings? Are we expecting that to get a little better? Are we expecting it to get a little worse? How are we factoring uh, the economy and it, the sort of spillover effects there?
Right. I would just say that in terms of the court system and the current pace, I would not expect that to change much, because it is what it is in terms of the number of judges that the court has at its disposal. And I don't believe that the county government added any additional funds for the judicial system in this last budget iteration. And so what we are doing and what I anticipate presenting to the commission is an opportunity to share out where we are with lease enforcement at our May 28th meeting, so that you will get a better understanding of the initiatives that we currently have underway. We have deployed our resident services team, so we have more data around why people aren't paying rent immediately, real data when they missed a month. We're learning a lot of different factors, including people being deployed and having to go on military assignments, people moving states. It's not just always what we think it is in terms of not paying rent because of employment. And so we'll have some additional insights there. We will do our best as it pertains to trying to ensure that the tenants who are with us stay with us. The team has been creative in thinking about retention strategies in terms of encouraging lease renewals, so that we can hopefully avoid people leaving our units. And then there's a great deal of this budget that is going into marketing efforts, thinking creatively around master leasing, where there may be better opportunities. There's some huge partners that we're exploring in terms of some master lease concepts, either with different institutions and or agencies that need housing, that could potentially create some stability for us. And so we're thinking, the team is definitely thinking creatively on how we can stabilize even in uncertain times. But in terms of adding additional losses for what may be projected economic uncertainty, I think we have been as conservative as we can be at this moment. And we'll have to continue what we do, and that is coming back to the commission as factors change to determine if there's another consideration in regards to our budget analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I certainly wouldn't expect the court timeline to speed up. And it's just, to me, it's a question of whether there's additional backlog that slows it down further. And I did have some questions on lease enforcement, but if you want me to wait, if you're planning a larger presentation on that.
We are. It will be coupled with the presentation around our reforecasting. It goes hand in hand with understanding where we are and where we thought we'd be and how far along we've come. And we've also, as I shared previously, the council the shelters are full. And so we just find ourselves in a quandary of holding tenants who aren't able to pay, but also where the court has realized there's not many other options. And I think that we're experiencing that impact.
Yeah.
But we will definitely have more information on how we've come along.
Okay. So, I'm curious also, like, how long is it taking us to fill vacancies once a unit becomes available?
Could we bring up our property management partners to address that question, please?
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Ross Lloyd, Vice President of Property Management. So on average, it's taking anywhere from 2 to 30 days, depending on the unit, depending on the location. Choose what we're saying.
Okay, that's not bad. And that's, I assume that's after any maintenance?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's always questions on, like, how do we speed up the time before a unit becomes available? But I know that's
One of the things, just so you know, on our third party, we actually are leasing the notices. So anytime someone goes on notice, we put that out there so a prospect can actually lease, with the hopes of they're securing that, and then that way we can hold our exposure for a third party.
Mm-hmm. Great. So there's actions being taken concurrently rather than
Correct.
Just waiting for one to start the next. Sort of related to slide 6, if you don't mind, with the expenses.
Page 14.
This is sort of also related to that T12 question, but looking at the bad debt, that's also been a place where we've, been experiencing much higher levels than early projected previously. And again, it looks like the recommended budget projects an increase over the 26 amended budget, but is significantly lower than what we've been experiencing over the trailing 12. How, I guess, I don't know how much of that, again, was in FY25, of the final 6 months of FY25, where we had $7 million total in bad debt. But if we're, stepping up our lease enforcement, should we expect greater bad debt than what we're projecting, or how are we coming to that number?
The lease enforcement is not going to increase your bad debt. You will have write-offs, but that is a balance sheet entry.
Okay.
Your bad debt reflects continual non-payment of rent. So as tenants are removed from the unit, then that allowance balance does not grow for that particular tenant. I will say it is a very conservative approach, and it's much higher at the beginning of the year. We did look also at where we are now and the next 4 months to see where that aligns with what this budget has. And in some cases, the budget has a little more conservative approach because we don't know who else may start not paying rent. Mm-hmm. But it is a trajectory of starting at a higher balance at the beginning of the year, higher bad debt expense, improving by the end of the year. Not getting back to the levels pre-COVID. I don't know that level will ever be achieved again, but it is improving over where we are now. But it is an assumed conservative approach that I know many times in the past we thought this would take 6 to 9 months, and history has proven that we're not in control of that, and 6 to 9 months is not reality.
And it's worth noting that that figure is 3, closer to 4 times higher than what the pre-COVID norms were.
Yeah. Let me see if others have questions.
Yeah, couple of things. Go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
Just,
Go ahead.
I should say, Mr. Chairman, that I'm organizing most of my questions, it sounds like, for the 28th, that Jeff's touching on many of the things on my mind, so.
Okay. One of the things that about budgeting, and you said it earlier, Tim, that budget is a dynamic process. And it's really you take a look at where you are at some point in time. You make the best judgment you can about what things are going to impact on both the operating revenue and operating expense side. And what I expect during the course of this year is that because of the dynamics of all the externalities that are there, that we may see a situation where we are talking more about budget changes during the year than we have typically done, just to keep us up with what's going on with these other kinds of externalities that are affecting the market in very different ways. Okay, so I appreciate the fact that on the opportunity, if I'm reading this chart correct, that really between the proposed budget and the recommended budget is only a reduction of $933,000. And most of that's coming from the projection on projected income from revenues from rents. Am I correct? The previous chart we had on revenue said there was going to be a difference in $933,000. And most of that's coming from dwelling rent, correct?
That's the, yeah, page 12. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so I expect that if in fact there are things that are happening that have a negative impact, hopefully we'll find some things that have a positive impact. They're shifted in a different way. That's really not a, to me, it recognizes that you all have taken a really sharper pen to look at something to bring that amount down on the proposed revised budget. And so that's to me is the right direction. Okay. And I hope that we continue to work on this as we go through this year. So thank you on that. The other thing I do mention to you also on the issue around unit turnaround time. I know at one point in time, HUD standard used to be 20 days, but the realities of what's going on in terms of supply chain issues, delivery, and things like that, the 30 days is in the industry standard for unit turnaround time. So I'm glad to see we are in that space.
I have just a few more questions. One is just a sort of kind of a broader question of beyond the slow pace of lease enforcement. I'm curious what you would consider the largest pain points that we've experienced in the past that have contributed to either on the income side or the expense side to sort of lower than projected revenues.
I'll weigh in here.
Oh.
I think that I would just highlight that there are certain properties where we did not expect it would be so difficult to get lease up occurring, especially in areas like Bethesda or some of our properties that are metro adjacent, where we would have anticipated a higher lease up outcome. And so creative efforts have had to be deployed in terms of marketing, understanding the submarkets, and sometimes it's a matter of timing. Our property is, our concessions have burned off when a new property is being introduced into that market, or other amenities that other nearby properties are able to offer that we are not able to offer at our properties, where we're having to think creatively on how we draw tenants. And so I would say that in addition to the lease enforcement, the creative nature around how do we attract new tenants has been an area of focus for us.
Okay.
Thanks. So yeah, so that's something that's a little bit more within our control. So good to hear. And I think this is probably my last question for now. As I noted at the beginning, I sort of really appreciate kind of the rethinking of the approach and to try to really hone in on the issues that we faced. I'm curious, are there any agencies that are getting this better, like doing a better job than we are? And like, are there best practices out there, like how they have, and whether we've consulted with anyone? You may not know this, but I don't know, like how much, you all are communicating with other agencies that have experienced similar issues.
Well, our friends in DC have been having quite a difficult time in regards to lease enforcement and tenant collections and um, developers being able to move forward. We were recently at a conference, Housing and conference that took place, and that was the crux of the conversation, and Chair Priest can surely weigh in. I would say that in terms of our other counterparts, if you think about it in its truest sense, we're dealing with other housing authorities. We're much better off than other housing authorities that are dealing with a great deal of additional challenge and limitations with the federal government and public housing subsidies needed to keep their housing stock viable. In terms of other private sector,
I'm thinking partly about the budgeting process, because I know we're all facing the same challenges, and I think HOC has done a really good job of confronting those challenges. But I am thinking about sort of the challenge in budgeting, and I'm asking about this in part because obviously it's important that we know going into the year, what to expect so that we can properly prepare, to be even more prepared, and whether there are agencies that, again, dealing with the same conditions that we are, slow lease enforcement, a challenging economy, that, they were able to more accurately project what those issues would be and what the costs would be to that in vacancy. And I don't know if there's sort of some best practices for this. I mean, it sounds like, again, the way some of the changes that you've made to the process, sound very promising. But I don't know if there's other methods out there that others are using.
I think we're trying to use all the best practices that are in our toolkit. I'm not going to name names with other organizations, but the other organizations that I speak with have done this much worse and have had to do a number of other things. And I am aware of a number of other housing authorities that have had to make some significant changes because they either got it wrong or that the resources, and they were not as diversified as we are, their resources dried up, and so they were forced to do certain things. So there are
I guess
certainly.
I was wondering who's doing it better. If anyone's doing it better than we did. I mean, maybe they're no, because this is tough.
I think instead of who has done it better, it's who has done it less worse almost at this point. we take a look at the budget conditions currently in the county and the struggles that they've had, as well as the struggles that are in the federal government. And so that is the reason why we're trying to be conservative. That's why we're trying to be a little bit more flexible, much more flexible in this. But it is lean economic times, and we're aware of that, and that is why we're trying to present this in this kind of manner.
Interesting question you raised, Jeff. But referring back to the conference that we went to this week, there was that Urban Institute has put together a major dashboard to look at indicators, to look at how the industry is progressing and whatnot. I can tell you not one of those dealt with what you're talking about. They look at issues around unit count, number of permits, number of construction starts, all those things like that. They look at a little bit about they don't even look at rent payment. It was not one of the indicators in that study. Okay, they look at what have been traditional industry standards for looking at how we are performing, but not ones on operational. Very few data sets that I'm aware of that deal with sort of looking at operational kinds of comparison. But I think we're doing pretty well in that regard. But it is a challenge. And it's interesting listening to Jeff's questions, and in my mind, it's like that there are so many things that we don't control. For example, in the leasing enforcement, that's a court-related matter. So you would think that somebody on that side would be thinking about these other pressures and whether we need to be getting more administrative judges to deal with getting us through this period. But people just don't seem to think like that. They keep on bearing along with the same resources, thinking they're going to address a different problem. And I don't know how we get that raised to a point of conversation within not only the county executive, who's now responsible for it really, but the courts, which is a different legislative side of the government. But it's how we bring people to the table when we are confronting these kinds of industry impacts. We've got to figure out a better way to do that. Yeah.
And I think one thing in addition to that, this past 6 years is unprecedented. The world has never gone through this experience. I don't know that there are best practices out there of how to approach when your tenants don't pay rent for 7 years or 6 years. I do think that this is going to develop into many new case studies for future business majors, and new best practices may be developed, but we're learning as we go. And every day something new unfolds. Some of these things we could have never predicted.
Just to add what Terry was saying, if you look at Montgomery County from 2024 to 2025, the study shows that 34,000 people were served a failure to not pay rent. So that lets you know what the exposure is in the county. So that dictates how you kind of manage and the exposure based on residents that are not paying rent. And that's huge.
Yeah. And that was some discussion among some of the developers and landlords on the panel had to deal with the fact that in DC, for example, a number of the nonprofit housing providers and developers have closed shop because they cannot maintain the operation because they don't have the resources coming from rental income. The other thing that we are fortunate about is that we are one of the few authorities in the country that is totally no longer public housing. Okay, and so those that are still public housing are depending upon HUDs to make payments related to HUD's operating formula they have for how much subsidy they give to the authority and capital side. They are hurting really badly. And fortunately, we are not in that bill stream. But no, it's really it's playing out, and it's interesting. It's not just in many cases. If America got a cold in housing, affordable housing, it was the people like us who suffered the most. But now the private sector is also experiencing the very same thing we are. Okay, where they are having tenants who are not paying rent, and what do you do with them? And the cost of rent has gone up so high now that you cannot look at unit turnaround the same way. It takes you longer to lease up a unit that was formerly $800 when I moved in, and it's now $3,500.
And where we are dependent on the government for our housing choice voucher program, we spoke to you on April 17th about this, that HUD kept indicating we would prorate it 100% with an assumed inflation factor. And we waited and waited and waited for that assumed inflation factor, and it is 0%.
Mm-hmm.
And the 100% went to 0.99617 or something. So they take your cost from 25, they reduce it just a little and give you no inflation when rents are rising, as Commissioner Priest just mentioned. That area, we are still dependent on HUD. And for the first time in my history of going on 21 years, and probably before that, there is no inflation factor for housing assistance payments for this area.
Yeah.
Apparently inflation has been solved.
We need their best practice.
Mr.
yeah,
Chair, I
yeah.
just wanted to, Terry took words out of my mouth and she used the word unprecedented. I think we are in an environment that's unprecedented. I think some fundamental ways in which we think about projecting this stuff have changed significantly. And maybe the most chilling thing you said was we aren't going back to the days pre-COVID, right? And I mean, we can hope for a more organized, predictable market, or no, not market, can't predict market, organized way of managing properties in a changing market. But it feels like the challenge for us, even projecting 6 months from now, in terms of those exogenous variables, as well as how quickly we'll get back to normalization, makes this really hard. And so I just, I applaud how you're struggling through it, and appreciate that you are now establishing the best practices for how we think about the challenges.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
No, just again reiterating my thanks to the staff and for really all the hard work they're putting into this. So it's tough.
Next item. The next item is, are you through your presentation on the Opportunity Fund?
Yes, thank
So-
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll accept the report.
That was probably the hardest one.
And now we move to the second item, which is the presentation on the mortgage finance and real estate development budgets.
Yes, and commissioners, this will be, I believe, a shorter discussion because it's what you already know and expect, which is it's based on when we expect our properties to be delivered and how that impacts our income from both our commitment fees and our development fees. And as the board knows, those deadlines and timelines vary. And so this presentation is pretty straightforward. We've made sure that you're clear about the properties in terms of where there might be delays or additional revenue that we received based on timing. And so with that, I will turn it back to the finance team.
Amended budget for mortgage finance and real estate divisions. This presentation will inform of why we're not just a public housing agency. If we could go to page 6 of the packet, slide 2. Again, this is a very familiar chart. I'm not going to belabor the point of this is where we began. The only thing that I will mention is you see shaded in blue that we did the previous presentations, we were identifying one fund. This presentation actually touches each of our funds, the general fund, multi and single family bond funds, the Opportunity Housing Fund as it relates to the Opportunity Housing Reserve Fund, or OHRF, and the public fund as well. If we could go to page 7, slide 3. And this is where we ended at our previous presentation, including the changes from the public fund and Opportunity Housing Fund. Our position has improved approximately $601,000, and that will change by the end of this presentation. If we could go to page 8, slide 4. Thank you. The chart on page 8 shows a 5-year detail of the mortgage finance division. You will again notice we segregate non-operating and operating by putting non-operating in the light blue shaded color. The mortgage finance division generates commitment fees and loan management fees on the transactions that are financed by HOC and monitored for loan and regulatory compliance. Commitment fees are split 40%, which is unrestricted and supports agency operations, and 60%, which is restricted to the OHRF for future capital investment in real estate. The portion of income to the general fund supplements the unrestricted cash from our properties that support agency operations that we spoke about in the previous presentation. The FY 2027 recommended budget included fees of approximately $3.913 million in commitment fees. That is a decrease of $3.039 million from the FY 26 amended budget, And of the 3.9, approximately 1.565 is unrestricted to support agency operations, and 2.348 million is restricted to the OHRF. Changes have been made after April's recommended budget presentation, and you will see noted in the slightly darker blue, based on the revisions in the size and timing of the projected transactions, the FY 2027 revised budget now includes fees of approximately 2.485 million, a decrease of 1.428 million from the recommended budget, of which approximately 994,000 will support agency operations. This graph shows the pie form breakout of the 2027 revised projected revenue from mortgage finance of just over $12 million. Loan management fees represent approximately $3 million, or 24.93%, and that is a consistent, stable source of income towards agency operations. The commitment fees make up 2.49% of the pie, a total of 20.69%, with 1.49 million, or 12.41%, restricted to the OHRF, and 994,000, or 8.28%, going to the general fund. We have bond draws that account for a total of 5.18 million from the single and multifamily bonds. That's 43.13%, and those draws cover the administrative cost of the respective programs. The FHA risk share income is 1.15 million, or 9.57%, and when we move to expenses, you'll see a corresponding amount equal to that, as that's the monies paid by properties on the program that is then restricted into the reserve. And finally, the county closing cost grant that covers the administrative cost for that program is approximately 201,000, or 1.68%. If we can move to page 10, slide 6. The graph on page 10 shows the breakout of the projected 2027 expenses of 6.742 million. As you can see, they are comprised of personnel of 3.378 million, or 50.11%, other operating expenses of 164,000, or 2.43%. Management fees are 1.981 million, or 29.39%, and that are the fees that are also paid to the general fund to support agency overhead. I mentioned there's mortgage insurance and trustee fees of approximately 69,000, and finally the restriction of the FHA risk share monies that are paid into the reserve. As a reminder, the excess income generated by mortgage finance that exceeds the divisional expenses supports agency operations, and primarily that comes from the loan management fees and the unrestricted commitment fees, and then supports the OHRF with the 60% of the projected commitment fees. If we can move to page 11. This chart shows you 5-year detail of the real estate development division, again showing non-operating expenses shaded in light blue. The transfer between funds reflects the draw from the OHRF to pay for real estate salary and benefits directly related to development, as well as a pre-development fund related to projects that have not yet been fully developed. The costs for that are only drawn if the expenses cannot be directly charged to a particular transaction. The budget also includes a draw of approximately $135,000 for the 0.05% commitment fee assessed on outstanding loans from the PNC line of credit and real estate line of credit. Again, the costs are only drawn for these expenses when they cannot be charged to a particular transaction. Development fees, similar to the commitment fees, are split with 40% being unrestricted to support agency operations and 60% restricted to the OHRF for future capital investments. The portion of the income to the general fund, again, combined with the loan management fee and commitment fees and unrestricted cash from our properties, support agency operations. The FY27 recommended budget included fees of $3.705 million, which was a decrease of $2.499 million from the FY26 amended budget, of which approximately $1.482 million is unrestricted and $2.223 was restricted. Changes, again, have been made since the April recommended budget, and the revised budget now includes a projection of totaling $3.105 million, a decrease of $600,000 from the recommended budget, of which approximately $1.242 million will be unrestricted for agency operations and $1.863 million will be restricted to the OHRF. If we could go to the next slide on page 12. This chart represents where we are right now at this point in time with the agency revised operating budget, summarizing the cumulative changes that have been made through the 4 presentations. Again, impact of this presentation. The impact of the changes to income and expenses introduced results in a decrease of $811,000 in fee income to the general fund and a decrease to fee income of the OHRF of 12.217. It's worth noting that the change in the OHRF will simply reduce the amount of fees that can be restricted to that fund, so only the loss of revenue in the general fund flows to the bottom line. That brings us to a net reduction from our balanced budget of approximately $211,000. If this were the end of changes that we anticipated, our draw would increase from $4.629 million to $4.84. However, as Tim mentioned, we do anticipate additional changes. Some of these are standard. We always update our personnel complement for changes, and we do also look at our allocated overhead model. We update it each year based on the recommended budget, and that changes what is charged to our revenue generating divisions. In addition, we have grant refinements to be made based on changes in awards and potential property cash flow and commitment and development fee revisions based on changes. There. I want to also remind you that the fees that we're projecting from our development and financing activities are point in time as those budgets go through the Development and Finance Committee and ultimately to the Commission, and that is their approval process. We take a point in time snapshot of the best information known at this time. And as President Andrews mentioned, that changes and fluctuates based on market conditions and many other factors throughout the year. This brings us to the end. I want to thank you for your consideration in these presentations. As Mr. Getzinger mentioned, we will bring a full reconciliation on June 10th of all the changes that have been made thus far and the impact of any upcoming changes that will be made between now and that time. But I'm happy to address any questions you may have.
Are there any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Terry, thank you so much for that presentation. Something I should probably know, are the splits between restricted and unrestricted commitment fees and development fees for flowing as a function of the transactions themselves? Are there restrictions in there, or are there some budget choices
No,
in
that
what
has
gets
been a
restricted?
commission-driven split that has come up every year as to whether or not that is the appropriate split, but that 60-40 split is commission approval driven.
And it's an ongoing budget policy we've had for years.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be the person to bring it up again this year.
Thank you.
But it's just, I haven't thought about it much lately because it has been that, but I mean, would there ever be a point where the staff would recommend a different split?
Yes.
Yes.
And
There
there has been multiple occasions in which our CFO has provided some analysis for the staff to consider what it may look like for us to modify that split based on certain conditions. And we would present to the commission a recommendation around that if and or when necessary. And so you might imagine that in certain economic circumstances, we may request a slight modification. We do believe the overall policy is a good one because you have to continue to have funding to continue the development that continues the funding. And so it really is a chicken and an egg situation, but there are
Or Roy, did you want to?
No, I'm just going to say that I was just going to acknowledge and say I appreciate the fact that the presentations you have been making to us over the different funds that we have been going through, that you all have been in real time making changes and coming back with revisions. And so I appreciate that they have been waited until the end. So thank you for that.
I second that.
On the timing issue, there's a lot of factors that go into that, obviously, and we're constantly having to adjust to that. I'm curious, as part of your budgeting process, how you make those determinations on timing and how you take a conservative approach. Like how much of what we're projecting is, say, in the fourth quarter of the year that may end up getting delayed into, the next fiscal year.
So I will tell you that our partners in mortgage finance and real estate do provide the timing and the size of those fees based on their latest, greatest information related to each transaction. As the budget officer, when those fees come in and say it's going to come in June, I strongly question that timeline as to whether it really will come in June. And sometimes the changes you see are applying that conservative approach that if we get it early, great, but not building a budget when it gets really tight at the end of the year. We're working on transactions right now, trying to close by year end. And so great efforts go into that, but we do want to layer on that conservative approach, even if we can over deliver and put in the conservative approach. But the transaction time and amounts come from our counterparts who are the experts in those areas.
Additionally, what you see in the budget is what is assumed in. And again, those Q4 transactions are the ones that are most heavily scrutinized. You see the ones that have made it. You don't see the ones that didn't make it and got kicked to the next fiscal year.
That's what I was wondering, like, if sometimes we get something that, development may say it's coming in Q4, and we say, well, let's be conservative and we'll just push it into next year. And if we get it this year, great. But a similar question, there are times where we end up deferring some of our fees. And do we ever make any assumptions about deferred fee income?
So the deferred fees aren't assumed to come in. When those fees come in, they follow that similar split because we do not know when that deferred fee is going to come in. Many of them are dependent on the waterfall of, for instance, a tax credit transaction that is additional income that we may earn in a year but did not assume us receiving that. transaction, what we expected in 26, what has happened. There are some fees that have moved into 27 and are now represented there. There are some fees that we did receive that we did not anticipate being able to receive this year. So there's always plus and minuses.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we have about 22 calendar year properties that we only assume the management fee portion. We don't assume any of the deferred developer fees in there, just because there's so much that you would have to be able to assume in terms of the waterfall that it's just not worth putting it into a projection.
I don't have any additional questions.
You know, I appreciate the fact that we take a informed, conservative approach to our budget development. I have been affiliated with other organizations who took a more aggressive budgetary approach. The rationale behind that was that it made the staff realize that we have got to work harder to close this budget gap. Okay? And I don't advocate for that, but I have been with organizations that wasn't thinking, you know? It forces the staff to say, we've got a $2 million budget gap we've got to close this year. And sometimes it worked. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. We might not necessarily stress that in the strategic plan and its reporting, but the strategic plan is very much so a guideline, and it definitely does push staff to deliver what is expected of them. Maybe not specifically directly financially, but indirectly, I would say that it is definitely something that motivates them.
Yeah. Very good. Any other question, Paul? None. Thank you all very much for the presentation. We have no other business to come before the committee today. So I would take a motion to adjourn the meeting. We don't have to really take a motion, I guess, to do adjourn. This committee was adjourned as of 11:28 a.m.
Thank you.
It's good you can
Thank
take
you.
that.